This video is made possible by viewers like you.
Good evening, Jason. Welcome to episode 1 of the ABCs of Linux. Today, we're talking about Apple. Now, before we get started, let me introduce the show. This is the pilot episode, yippee-ki-yay. And I think I'm making this show in order to help you, teach you guys, someone who's never touched Linux before, never touched Unix-like systems before, and to essentially get you into it. Hold your hand throughout the way as you introduce it. Kind of like a tutorial, like a video game tutorial. Just something you can go along the way, and maybe you can learn something new. But, of course, we're starting off today with Apple. A is for Apple. Now, you may be thinking, Gabe, why go with Apple when you could start with Arch? Arch is so cool. And now, you are right on that. However, I think Apple has played a large role and is what you most likely know for a Unix-like system, because that's what Apple is. That's the family branch it falls under, being based on the Darwin kernel. What's the Darwin kernel? Well, we're going to talk about that. Quit asking questions, because we're going to answer them, okay? Let's get started. So, in the grand old year of 2001, a couple major things happened. Two things in New York, one involving the Pentagon. However, something more important happened, at least to me. That's right, the release of Darwin. More specifically, Darwin 1.3. However, it uses BSD utilities, which is super duper cool. So, in 2000, Apple released the core operating system components as open source, Darwin. And Jordan K. Hubbard, co-founder of BSD, was brought onto the Apple team to work on said BSD components, which is incredible. And the Darwin operating system is still available today. Like, you can get it, which is crazy, which is a big part of this. Now, you may be thinking, still, okay, why introduce with Apple first? Because Apple is the Unix-like system. It's the one most people are familiar with. If you have an iPhone, that's more or less a vertical Unix-like system. I'm gonna put up a screenshot of macOS and Arch Linux with GNOME on each side of my head here, where my hands are pointing at. If they're on camera, I don't know. They're gonna be somewhere here by my head. I want you to tell me, they look super similar, and that's true, because they're Unix-like systems.
So, status update. Michael MJD just made a video on Paros, which is an Arch-based Linux distribution designed to look exactly like macOS, right as I was working on this video, and I think that's really funny. What the hell?
So, if you are not familiar whatsoever with Unix-like systems, and you have experience with Mac, then you have experience with operating a Linux-like system. It's super duper important, and it's the biggest show in sign of success of how Unix-like systems exist, and how they are. Is this your show? It is. It is totally. He knows what he's talking about more than I do. However, macOS includes a lot of FreeBSD components, which we'll get into tomorrow, into next week's episode. However, Apple is Unix. It is a Unix-like system that has found amazing success. I mean, I know at least 2 people who have a MacBook, which is more than I know people in real life who don't have a Linux-like system. Yeah, that's pretty sad. However, with especially things like the new MacBook Neo, which people are fawning over for some reason, it's just overall a good show of, yeah, Unix-like systems do exist out there, and they are easy to use, given how popular Macs are. Give me a second, I'm very sick right now, so if I sound sick, that's why. However, Apple has done quite a lot. If I go back to it, Apple has been one of the major players in computing for forever, genuinely speaking. It is probably one of the most important companies when it comes to creative development and for creative spaces on computing. And cut and dry, they're still one of the largest fully ecosystems that you can get into. Now, they do a lot I disagree with, and they're quite expensive. However, everybody's like that nowadays. Just having Mac as the show, yeah, this is what Linux is like. The user experience of a MacBook, if you include a couple plugins to GNOME, is more or less the same. You have a very, very similar workflow, very, very similar user experience, which is super duper cool and important. But if you use the Mac, you can use Linux, which someone should keep in mind. If you have used a Mac, you can use Linux. It's not hard. This is a great way to have machines that originally ran Windows hardware, or if you like Mac OS but don't have an ARM CPU, and like 90% of computing guys, you can install Linux to have a Mac OS-like system, which I'll put a Rice guide to do that down below. Which we'll get into Rice. Rice is essentially customization. It's customizing your desktop environment, your desktop, what you use. Like, if you can use Mac, you can use Linux. It's not hard. And I think that's the big part people feel is like, I don't know what I'm doing, I'm scared. However, Mac has a very similar experience and workflow to Linux with GNOME. You can do it. Trust me. You got this. However, I think we're going to close off this video. It's going to be pretty short. But if you can use Mac, you can use Linux. Go out there and just start with it. I'll see you all next week for a video on FreeBSD.